"Who let her in?" the hostess demanded. The Duke stood. "I did. She's my guest." The chandeliers in Lady Pemberton's ballroom held 300 candles each, and Margaret Shaw had counted every one of them. Twice. It was preferable to counting the number of young ladies who had whispered behind their fans as she passed, or the gentlemen whose eyes had slid over her like water over glass, finding no purchase, no reason to pause. 47 whispers, 12 dismissive glances. One evening not yet half over. She stood near a pillar wreathed in hothouse roses, her dance card empty save for 2 names, her father's. For the opening quadrille he had abandoned halfway through when Lord Pemberton had beckoned him toward the card-room, and Mr. Harold Finch, a ruddy-faced widower of 53, who had spent their entire waltz staring at her décolletage while inquiring about her father's shipping interests. "The merchant's girl cleans up rather well, I suppose?" a voice drifted from behind the pillar. "Though that shade of green does nothing for her complexion. All those dreadful freckles. Mamma says her dowry is £40,000. A second voice, younger, breathless with scandalized delight. "Can you imagine? Papa says old Shaw made it all in cotton mills. The workers' fingers get caught in the machines sometimes, you know. Chewed right off. So really, one might say her fortune is built on blood and bone." Laughter, bright and brittle as breaking glass. Maggie did not move. She had learned long ago that movement attracted attention, and attention invited fresh cruelty. Better to stand still, to let the words wash over her like rain against a window, to pretend she was somewhere else entirely. £40,000. They never got the figure quite right. It was closer to 60, not that it mattered. £60,000 could not buy her a complexion free of freckles. It could not make her hair any less aggressively red, could not teach her to simper and giggle like the Pemberton girl currently dissecting her behind the roses. It could not erase the stain of trade from her bloodline, could not manufacture the generations of aristocratic breeding that separated her from every other woman in this room. "She's been out for 4 seasons now," the older voice continued. 4. If Papa had not specifically requested I be civil to her something about Mr. Shaw and the canal investment, I should not acknowledge her at all. "Poor thing," the younger voice said, in a tone that suggested she found Maggie's situation not pitiable but amusing. "Do you think she knows no one will ever marry her? Not properly, I mean. Perhaps some desperate younger son might take her on for the money, but can you imagine her at court? The Queen would faint dead away." Maggie's fingers tightened on her empty dance card. The Queen would do no such thing, she thought savagely. The Queen had better things to concern herself with than the bloodlines of every woman presented to her. But saying so would accomplish nothing except confirming what everyone already believed, that Margaret Shaw was proud, prickly, unable to accept her place in the grand social order. And perhaps they were right. Perhaps pride was all she had left. She moved away from the pillar before she could hear more, weaving through the crowd with the practiced invisibility of the perpetually unwelcome. Her gown was not wrong for her complexion. She had chosen the deep emerald silk precisely because it made her hair glow like autumn fire and her eyes shine like sea glass. She was not beautiful by the tonne's narrow standards, but she had learned to dress in ways that pleased her own eye, since pleasing anyone else's had proven impossible. A servant passed with a tray of champagne, and Maggie took a glass, offering the young woman a small smile. The maid's eyes widened. Guests did not typically smile at servants before she bobbed a curtsy and hurried on. "You should not do that," a voice said at her elbow. "The other guests will think you are peculiar." Maggie turned to find Mrs. Amelia Blackwood, wife of a minor baronet, and one of the few women in society who had ever treated her with anything approaching genuine warmth. They had met 2 seasons ago at a musicale, when both had been trapped in conversation with an elderly countess who was stone-deaf and insisted on discussing her digestive complaints at length. Shared suffering had forged a tentative friendship. "I am already peculiar," Maggie replied. I might as well be pleasant about it. The merchant's daughter who smiles at servants and refuses to flirt with fortune hunters. Amelia shook her head, dark curls bouncing beneath her pearl-studded headband. You are a walking scandal, my dear. I believe one must actually be invited to scandals to participate in them. This, Maggie gestured at the glittering ballroom, the swirling dancers, the clusters of elegantly dressed aristocrats who had not looked her way all evening, is merely tolerance. My father's money opens doors. His money does not make anyone glad to see me walk through them. Amelia's expression softened. It is not as bad as all that, surely. Is it not? Maggie smiled, the bright, brittle smile she had perfected over 4 seasons of being an outsider in silk and diamonds. Tell me, Amelia, when you arrived tonight, did anyone whisper about your breeding? Did anyone speculate about your dowry, or your father's business, or whether the Queen might faint if forced to acknowledge your existence? Maggie, I am not fishing for pity. She softened the words with a touch to Amelia's gloved hand. Only correcting a misperception. I know exactly where I stand, and it is on ground that will never quite stop shifting beneath my feet. I have made peace with it. This was a lie, but it was a lie she had told so many times that it had calcified into something resembling truth. She did not need their acceptance. She did not want their approval. She had her books, her father's love, her own stubborn sense of self-worth. It was enough. It had to be enough. A sudden ripple passed through the crowd, not the excited flutter that attended most arrivals, but something colder, more electric. Conversations faltered and resumed at lower volumes. Fans moved more rapidly. Heads turned toward the entrance with expressions that mixed curiosity and something very like fear. Good heavens, Amelia breathed. Is that it cannot be... Who? Maggie followed her friend's gaze toward the ballroom's entrance, where Lady Pemberton had gone very still, her professional hostess smile frozen in place. The Duke of Thornfield. They call him the Ice Duke. Amelia clutched Maggie's arm. He never attends these things. Never. Lady Pemberton must be beside herself to have secured such a coup. Only look at her face. She had no idea he was coming. Maggie looked. Lady Pemberton did indeed appear as though she had swallowed something unpleasant, and was trying very hard to pretend it was champagne. And beside her, still half in shadow, stood... Oh! He was tall. That was her first thought, watching him step fully into the candlelight. Tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in stark black evening clothes that made every other man in the room look faintly ridiculous in their peacock colours. His hair was dark, almost black, shot through with silver at the temples in a way that should have aged him, but instead lent him an air of severity, of power, of something ancient and unmovable. She could not make out his features clearly from this distance, but she could see the way people parted for him, the way conversations died as he passed, the way even the most confident society matrons seemed to shrink. "Why do they call him that?" she asked. "The Ice Duke?" "Because he is cold as winter and twice as unforgiving, or so I am told." Amelia's voice dropped to a whisper. "His wife died 3 years ago, in childbed. The baby too. They say he has not smiled since, has not danced, has not shown interest in any woman. He appears in society once or twice a season, stands in corners looking forbidding, and leaves everyone feeling like they have disappointed him simply by existing. How exhausting that must be for him." "Maggie," Amelia giggled, scandalized. "He is a duke, one of the wealthiest men in England. He could set fire to this ballroom, and people would thank him for the warmth. Then it is fortunate he is made of ice and cannot strike a spark." Maggie sipped her champagne, watching the Duke's progress through the room. "Look at them all, Amelia. They are terrified of him. Even Lady Pemberton, who has never been afraid of anyone in her life, is babbling like a schoolgirl." It was true. Lady Pemberton had attached herself to the Duke's arm and was gesturing expansively, her laughter too loud, her movements too quick. The Duke bore it with the patience of a statue, his face turned away so that Maggie still could not quite see his expression. But something in the set of his shoulders, the careful distance he maintained even while being touched, spoke of a man enduring rather than enjoying. She knew that feeling, knew it intimately. "I should not stare," she said, turning away. "I am already the subject of enough gossip without being caught gawking at a duke." "You could gawk at him all night and he would never notice." Amelia's tone was pragmatic rather than cruel. "Men like that do not notice women like us. We are furniture to them. Pleasant enough, occasionally useful, utterly unremarkable." Women like us. Amelia meant it kindly solidarity between those who occupied the lower rungs of society's ladder, but the words stung anyway. Women like us. Women who would never be more than background figures in the grand drama of aristocratic life. "I believe I need some air," Maggie said. "The room has grown rather close." "Shall I come with you?" "No, stay. Enjoy the spectacle." She pressed Amelia's hand. "I shall only be a moment." She slipped away before her friend could protest, navigating the crowd with practiced ease, seeking the terrace doors she had spotted earlier. The ballroom was beautiful, all gilt and crystal and hothouse flowers, but it was also suffocating, and Maggie had learned that survival sometimes meant knowing when to retreat. The terrace, when she found it, was blissfully empty. She stepped out into the cool night air and breathed deeply, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. The Pemberton garden stretched out before her, silvered by moonlight, and for a moment she could pretend she was somewhere else entirely, somewhere she belonged. A sound from the shadows made her turn, not on the terrace itself, but in a small alcove just beyond the doors, hidden from casual view by a potted orange tree. Muffled sobs, interspersed with frantic, whispered apologies. Maggie hesitated. The polite thing, the safe thing, would be to pretend she had heard nothing and return to the ballroom. But the sobs sounded young and frightened and desperately alone. She stepped toward the alcove. A serving girl crouched there, perhaps 16 years old, scrubbing frantically at a dark stain on her white apron. Wine, from the smell of it. Her cap was askew, her face blotchy with tears, and when she saw Maggie, she scrambled to her feet with a gasp of pure terror. "Oh, miss, please, I didn't mean it was an accident. I swear, Lord Pemberton's elbow caught my tray. And please don't tell Mrs. Hutchins. She'll turn me out without a reference. My mum needs the money. I can't—" "Hush." Maggie kept her voice gentle, the same tone she used with the stable cats at home. "Breathe. You are not in trouble." "But my apron—" The girl gestured helplessly at the spreading stain. "I can't go back in looking like this. Mrs. Hutchins said if I made one more mistake—" "What is your name?" Bessie, miss. Bessie Collins." "Well, Bessie Collins." Maggie reached into her reticule and withdrew a handkerchief, pressing it into the girl's shaking hands. "First, dry your eyes. Second, take off that apron and turn it around. The stain will be against your body instead of facing outward. Not comfortable, I grant you, but invisible." Bessie blinked at her with huge, watery eyes. I never thought of that." "Third, if Mrs. Hutchins gives you any trouble, you tell her that Lady Pemberton's guest, Miss Shaw, will have words with her. I may be a merchant's daughter, but my father's investment in Lord Pemberton's canal scheme ensures that my words carry some weight in this household. At least for tonight." "You would do that?" The girl's voice cracked. "For me?" Why did that question always surprise people? As if kindness were a limited resource to be hoarded, spent only on those who could offer something in return. "I have been where you are," Maggie said. "Not scrubbing wine from an apron, perhaps, but—" She paused, searching for words. feeling like one mistake will cost you everything, feeling like you do not belong, like you are only tolerated, like the ground could open beneath your feet at any moment. It is a terrible feeling. If I can ease it for someone else, even briefly, why would I not? Bessie's tears spilled over again, but she was smiling now. You're kind, miss. People say well. They say things about you. But they're wrong. People usually are. Maggie helped her turn the apron around, smoothing the fabric so the stain was hidden. There, good as new. Now splash some cool water on your face and return to the ballroom as if nothing happened. And if anyone gives you trouble, remember Miss Shaw will have words. The girl bobbed a curtsy so deep it was nearly a genuflection, then scurried off toward the servants' entrance. Maggie watched her go, feeling the peculiar ache that always followed these encounters. She could not save everyone, could not even save herself most days, but small kindnesses mattered. They had to matter. That was well done. The voice came from behind her, deep, quiet, and utterly unexpected. Maggie spun around, heart lurching, to find a figure emerging from the deeper shadows of the terrace. The moonlight caught dark hair, silver at the temples, and a face that looked as if it had been carved from marble by an artist who had forgotten what warmth felt like. The Duke of Thornfield. He must have been here the entire time, must have watched her comfort the crying maid, must have heard every word she said. And now he stood before her, close enough that she could see the grey of his eyes, pale, piercing, unsettlingly direct, and she had no idea what to do with her hands. Your Grace? She dropped into a curtsy, grateful for the familiar motion, the second of breathing room it provided. I did not realize anyone else was out here. Evidently. He did not smile. His face, now that she could see it clearly, was striking rather than handsome, all sharp angles and shadows, the kind of face that might soften beautifully if he ever allowed it to, but which currently looked as inviting as a locked door. You may rise, Miss Shaw, was it? You know my name? I make it a point to know who is in attendance at any event I am forced to endure. A pause, weighted with something she could not interpret. You are the textile merchant's daughter. I am. She met his gaze, chin lifting despite herself. Is that meant to be an observation or an accusation? Something flickered in those grey eyes, surprise, perhaps, or amusement, though his expression did not change. An observation only. I find I have few accusations to make about textile merchants. They tend to be refreshingly straightforward in their objectives. Unlike the aristocracy. Unlike everyone else in that ballroom, certainly. He moved to the terrace railing, looking out over the moonlit garden, and after a moment Maggie joined him. It was improper standing alone with an unmarried man, even if that man was old enough to be beyond scandal and cold enough to freeze any hint of impropriety before it could take root. But he did not seem inclined to dismiss her, and she found she did not want to leave. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Help the maid?" Because she needed help. Most guests would have reported her to the housekeeper, secured her dismissal. Most guests are cruel. The words came out sharper than she intended, and she tempered them with a breath. Forgive me. I should not speak ill of people who have been perfectly civil to me. Have they been? His gaze cut to her face, uncomfortably perceptive. Perfectly civil? Maggie thought of Lady Pemberton's daughter, the whispers, the 47 moments of carefully calibrated contempt she had catalogued since arriving. Civil enough? You are a poor liar, Miss Shaw. And you are presumptuous for a man I met 30 seconds ago, Your Grace. The words hung between them, audacious, unforgivable. Maggie braced herself for ice, for fury, for the cutting dismissal she had just earned by speaking to a duke the way she spoke to everyone else. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The Duke of Thornfield's mouth twitched. It was not a smile, Nothing so warm as that, but it was a crack in the marble, a hint of humanity beneath the frost. "I have been called many things," he said. "Presumptuous is not usually among them. Then perhaps people should be more honest with you. Perhaps they should." He studied her, and Maggie felt suddenly transparent, as if he could see through her armor to the loneliness it protected. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I am not certain. Something less." A pause. "You speak to serving girls the same way you speak to dukes." "I speak to everyone the same way." "I have found that tailoring one's manner to another person's station is exhausting and ultimately pointless. People see through it anyway." "Most people do not see through anything." "Then most people are not paying attention." Maggie turned to face the garden again, uncomfortable under the weight of his gaze. "Why are you here, Your Grace? Amelia Mrs. Blackwood told me you never attend these events." "Mrs. Blackwood knows a great deal about my habits for someone I have never met." "Society talks. You are a popular subject." "Am I?" His tone suggested he found this neither flattering nor troubling, merely tiresome. "And what does society say about me, Miss Shaw?" "That you are cold, that you have not smiled or danced since your wife died, that you make everyone feel as though they have disappointed you simply by existing." She paused, then added, because honesty seemed to be the only currency he respected, "that you could set this ballroom on fire and people would thank you for the warmth." A breath of silence. Then, "That last part sounds as though it came from you rather than society." Perhaps it did. She risked a glance at him and found him watching her with an expression she could not read. "Am I wrong?" "About the fire? Possibly. I have never felt any particular urge toward arson." Another twitch of his lips, there and gone. "About the rest, society is not entirely wrong. I do find most social gatherings disappointing, but not, I think, for the reasons they imagine." "And what are the reasons they imagine?" "That I consider everyone beneath me, that my standards are impossibly high, that I am so consumed by grief that I have forgotten how to feel anything else." He turned to face her fully, and Maggie had the unsettling sensation of being truly seen for the first time in years. "Shall I tell you the truth, Miss Shaw?" "If you wish. I find social gatherings disappointing because everyone in them is performing, including me, especially me, and I have grown very tired of performances." His eyes held hers. "You do not perform. That maid Bessie Collins will remember your kindness long after she has forgotten every aristocrat who looked through her tonight, because you were real with her. You were present. That is rarer than you know." Maggie did not know what to say. She had been insulted at parties, patronized, ignored, occasionally propositioned by fortune hunters who saw her dowry and nothing else. She had never been seen, understood, appreciated for the very qualities that made her unacceptable to everyone else. "You do not know me," she said finally. "You have known me for 5 minutes. I could be performing right now, for all you know, playing the part of the kind-hearted misfit to win your sympathy." "You could be." He tilted his head, considering. "Are you?" "No. I did not think so." He straightened, and something in his manner shifted a subtle closing, as if he had revealed more than he intended, and was now drawing the curtains shut. "I should return inside. Lady Pemberton will send a search party if I remain absent much longer." "Of course." Maggie stepped back, creating proper distance between them. It was... What? What was this encounter? She did not have a word for it. "Thank you for not minding that I spoke frankly with you. Thank you for not minding that I listened." He moved toward the terrace doors, then paused. "Are you attending Lady Whitmore's garden party next week, Miss Shaw?" The question caught her off guard. I know. I was not invited. Ah. A single syllable, weighted with something she could not interpret. A pity. And then he was gone, swallowed by the golden light and glittering crowd of the ballroom, and Maggie was left alone on the moonlit terrace, wondering if she had dreamed the entire exchange. The invitation arrived 6 days later. Maggie was in her father's study when the butler brought it in a cream envelope, sealed with burgundy wax, addressed in elegant copperplate to Miss Margaret Shaw. Not to Mr. Reginald Shaw and family, not to the Shaw household, to her, specifically and personally. Her father looked up from his correspondence. Reginald Shaw was a man built like a barrel, with Maggie's red hair faded now to ginger grey and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He had started life as a mill worker's son and ended it well. Not ended it, she hoped, since he was only 53 as one of the wealthiest merchants in England. He loved his daughter fiercely, if somewhat bewilderedly, and had never quite understood why the world did not love her too. "What is it, Maggie mine?" She broke the seal, unfolded the paper, and felt the floor shift beneath her feet. "Lady Whitmore requests the pleasure of Miss Shaw's company at a garden party on Thursday, the 15th of May, at Whitmore House, Mayfair." That alone would have been startling enough. Lady Whitmore was famously exclusive. Her garden parties were coveted invitations that Maggie had never once received. But it was the line at the bottom that stole her breath, attending as the guest of His Grace, the Duke of Thornfield. "Maggie," her father's voice came from very far away. "You have gone quite pale. Is something wrong?" "I do not know." She looked up, the invitation trembling slightly in her hands. "I honestly do not know." She should not go. That was the sensible conclusion, and Maggie prided herself on being sensible. The Duke of Thornfield had spoken to her for perhaps 10 minutes at a ball. He had seemed to appreciate her frankness, had even almost smiled once or twice. But that did not explain why he would extend his social protection to a merchant's daughter he barely knew. There had to be an ulterior motive. There was always an ulterior motive. Perhaps he wished to use her to scandalize society, to prove some point about the absurdity of social hierarchies. Perhaps he had some business connection with her father that she was unaware of. Perhaps, and this seemed most likely, the invitation was a mistake, a secretary's error that would be quietly corrected before the event. But when she sent a carefully worded note inquiring whether there had been some confusion, the response came back within hours. "No confusion. I hope you will attend." Thornfield. Thornfield. Not His Grace the Duke of. Just the name, as if they were intimates. As if he expected her to recognize his handwriting, which she realized with a flutter of something dangerous she now did. "You should go," her father said when she showed him the correspondence. "When a duke invites you to a party, you go to the party. When a duke invites me to a party, I become deeply suspicious of his motivations." Maggie paced the study, her sensible shoes clicking against the hardwood floors. "I spoke to him for 10 minutes, father. 10 minutes, most of which I spent being inappropriately frank about his reputation. Why would he possibly want to be seen with me in public?" "Perhaps he liked your frankness." "People do not like frankness. They say they do, but they mean they like flattery delivered with enough wit to sound honest." "You are too cynical for a woman of 24. "I am precisely cynical enough for a woman of 24 who has spent 4 seasons watching society pretend to tolerate her." She stopped pacing, pressing her hands to her temples. "If I attend this party, everyone will talk. They will want to know why the Duke of Thornfield has taken an interest in me. They will speculate about whether he means to marry me, which is absurd because dukes do not marry merchants' daughters, and when nothing comes of it, I will be even more of a laughingstock than I already am. And if you do not attend?" She had thought about this too. If she refused the invitation, she would spend the rest of her life wondering what might have happened if she had accepted. wondering if she had thrown away her one chance at what? Friendship? Patronage? Something more? That last thought was the most dangerous of all. She could not afford to hope for something more. "If I do not attend," she said slowly, "I prove that I am a coward, that I let fear dictate my choices, that I am no better than all the people who whisper about me behind fans and hide their cruelty behind courtesy." "Then you have answered your own question, Maggie mine." Her father rose from his desk and crossed to her, taking her hands in his calloused, work-roughened ones. He had never been ashamed of hands that showed labour. He considered them badges of honour. "You are not a coward. You are the bravest person I know. Go to the party. Let society talk. And if the Duke turns out to have ulterior motives, I will skewer him with my wit and leave him bleeding on Lady Whitmore's lawn. That's my girl." He kissed her forehead. "Wear the green silk. You look like a queen in it." Thursday arrived faster than seemed possible, and Maggie found herself standing in her bedroom, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror, trying to convince herself that she was making the right decision. The green silk gown was beautiful, she had that, at least. It was the same shade she had worn to the Pemberton ball, deep as forest shadows, cut in the latest fashion with a high waist and delicate puffed sleeves. Her hair was swept up and pinned with emerald-tipped hairpins, leaving a few deliberate curls to frame her face. She had not tried to hide her freckles. Powder only made them more obvious. Instead, she wore them like armour, daring anyone to find fault. "You look like a queen," her father had said. She did not feel like a queen. She felt like a woman about to walk into a lion's den, wearing nothing but silk and determination. Her father had intended to escort her, but a crisis at the mill had demanded his attention, a machinery failure, he said, that could not wait. She suspected he had manufactured the crisis specifically so she would have to face this alone, without his presence to suggest that she could not manage herself. He was right, damn him. She could manage herself. She always had. The carriage ride to Whitmore House took 20 minutes, during which Maggie rehearsed what she would say when she arrived. "Good afternoon, Lady Whitmore. Thank you so much for including me." "Yes, I am here as the Duke of Thornfield's guest." "No, I have no idea why." "No, I do not expect him to marry me." "No, I am not here to cause a scene." By the time the carriage rolled to a stop, she had worked herself into a state of calm determination that was almost convincing. She allowed the footman to hand her down, straightened her spine, and walked toward the garden gates. Lady Whitmore's garden was legendary, 3 acres of manicured beauty in the heart of Mayfair, with winding paths, a classical folly, and enough flowering plants to perfume the entire neighbourhood. Today it was filled with perhaps 100 guests, all of whom turned to look as Maggie presented her invitation to the footman at the gate. The footman's eyes widened slightly when he read the name at the bottom. His Grace, the Duke of Thornfield, but he was too well trained to comment. He bowed, stepped aside, and gestured for her to enter. She walked in alone. The whispers started immediately. Not the subtle whispers of the Pemberton ball, hidden behind fans and polite smiles, but open murmurs of surprise and speculation. She heard her name passed from group to group like a contagion, saw heads turn, eyebrows raise, expressions shift from confusion to disbelief to something that looked very like hostility. She kept walking. The garden path wound between hedges of blooming roses, and Maggie followed it as though she knew where she was going, as though she had every right to be here, as though she could not feel the weight of dozens of aristocratic stares pressing against her back, like hands trying to push her out. "You are not a coward," she told herself. "You are the bravest person Father knows. And if they do not want you here, Miss Shaw—" The voice came from ahead of her, and she looked up to find the Duke of Thornfield standing at the end of the path. He was dressed impeccably, as before dark coat, ivory waistcoat, cravat tied with mathematical precision. But there was something different about him today. Something almost anticipatory in the set of his shoulders, as if he had been waiting for her arrival. "Your Grace." She curtsied, glad that her voice came out steady. "Thank you for the invitation." "Thank you for accepting it." He extended his arm. "May I escort you to the refreshment tent? Lady Whitmore has acquired a truly alarming quantity of strawberries, and I am told they must be consumed before they perish from neglect." A laugh surprised its way out of her genuine, unexpected, entirely inappropriate given the circumstances. But his lips twitched in response, that almost smile she remembered from the terrace, and she found herself placing her hand on his arm as if this were perfectly normal. As if merchants' daughters walked through garden parties on the arms of dukes every day. The whispers intensified as they walked. Maggie kept her eyes forward, her chin high, her hand steady on his sleeve. She could feel the tension in his arm. He was not unaware of the attention they attracted, but he gave no outward sign of discomfort. His stride was measured, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world to parade her past the scandalized aristocracy. They had nearly reached the refreshment tent when a voice rang out behind them, sharp, imperious, designed to carry. "Who let her in?" Maggie stopped. The Duke stopped with her. Slowly, they turned. Lady Pemberton stood on the path, her face mottled with outrage, her fan clutched so tightly that its ivory sticks threatened to snap. Behind her, a cluster of guests had frozen mid-conversation, watching with the avid attention of spectators at a blood sport. "I beg your pardon?" Lady Whitmore. Until now a distant figure greeting guests by the fountain hurried over with an expression of horrified confusion. "Octavia, what—" "That woman." Lady Pemberton pointed a shaking finger at Maggie. "The merchant's daughter. Who let her in? This is a private party, Augusta. You cannot possibly have invited her." Silence fell over the garden. Every head turned toward Maggie. She felt their gazes like physical pressure, pinning her in place, stripping away every layer of armor until she was just a girl who did not belong, who had never belonged, who had been foolish enough to hope that this time might be different. And then the Duke of Thornfield moved. He stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Maggie, not blocking her from view, but positioning his body as a shield. When he spoke, his voice was not loud. He did not need it to be. The entire garden had gone quiet enough to hear a petal fall. "I did." Lady Pemberton's mouth opened and closed without sound. Lady Whitmore looked as if she might faint. In the crowd, someone gasped audibly. "I let her in," the Duke continued, each word precise as cut glass. "Miss Shaw is here as my guest. She will remain as my guest, and I suggest that anyone who takes issue with her presence take issue with me directly, rather than making a spectacle of themselves in Lady Whitmore's otherwise lovely garden." His gaze swept the assembled guests, lingering for a moment on Lady Pemberton's purpling face. "Have I made myself clear?" No one spoke. No one moved. The garden might have been a painting, frozen in oils. The Duke turned back to Maggie. His face was marble still. But his eyes, those grey eyes she had thought so cold, held something unexpected, something warm. "Miss Shaw?" He offered his arm again. "Shall we proceed to the strawberries? I believe we have kept them waiting long enough." She looked at his arm, looked at his face, looked at the 100 hostile stares surrounding them on all sides, and she smiled a real smile, not the brittle armor smile she wore in ballrooms, but something genuine and reckless, and entirely her own. "Yes," she said, placing her hand on his sleeve. "I believe we shall." The strawberries were, as promised, exceptional. Maggie stood beneath the striped canvas of the refreshment tent, a porcelain plate in her hand, and tried to focus on the perfectly ripe fruit rather than the extraordinary events of the past 10 minutes. The Duke had deposited her here with instructions to eat something. "You have gone rather pale, Miss Shaw, and I will not have you fainting on Lady Whitmore's lawn," before excusing himself to speak with their hostess. She could see them now through the tent's open flap, two figures engaged in what appeared to be a very serious conversation. Lady Whitmore kept glancing toward Maggie with an expression that hovered between mortification and fascination. The Duke's expression remained unreadable. "Well," a voice said at her elbow, "that was certainly dramatic." Maggie turned to find a young woman about her own age settling onto the bench beside her. She was pretty in an unconventional way. Dark hair, sharp features, a mouth that looked as though it smiled often and meant it. Her gown was expensive but simple, pale blue muslin with minimal adornment, and she moved with the easy confidence of someone who had never questioned her right to occupy any space she chose. "I am sorry," Maggie said carefully. "Have we been introduced?" "Not formally, which is dreadfully rude of me." The woman extended her hand in a gesture more suited to a gentleman's club than a garden party. "Lady Caroline Ashworth. You may call me Caroline, as I intend to call you Maggie, and we may as well dispense with formality since my brother has apparently decided to upend society on your behalf." "Brother." Maggie's mind caught on the word, made the connection, felt the ground shift again beneath her feet. "The Duke is your brother?" "Unfortunately for him, yes." Caroline's smile was warm and conspiratorial. "I have been a thorn in his side since birth, and I see no reason to stop now. I must say, I am delighted to finally meet you. Alexander has told me absolutely nothing about you, which means you must be terribly important." Maggie had no idea how to respond to this. "I believe you may be operating under a misapprehension. The Duke and I have spoken perhaps twice. I have no idea why he invited me here today." "No?" Caroline's eyebrows rose. "Then you are either remarkably unobservant or refreshingly modest. Either way, I approve." She plucked a strawberry from Maggie's plate without asking permission. "He attended the Pemberton ball, you know. He never attends anything. I had to physically pry the invitation from his hand to confirm he had actually gone somewhere voluntarily, and then he came home and immediately wrote to Lady Whitmore demanding that you be invited to her party." "Demanding, Maggie. My brother does not demand things. He suggests them in a tone that implies dire consequences for non-compliance, which is rather different. Perhaps he felt sorry for me. Alexander does not feel sorry for anyone. He feels responsible for them, which is far more troublesome." Caroline finished the stolen strawberry and reached for another. "He has been responsible for me since I was 16, and our parents died. Responsible for the estates, the tenants, the family name, the future of the entire Ashworth line. It has made him insufferably serious, but I suppose one cannot fault him for it." Maggie glanced toward the tent's entrance, where the Duke Alexander apparently was still deep in conversation with Lady Whitmore. "He does seem rather serious." "He was not always." Caroline's voice softened. "Before Eleanor, his wife, before she died, he could be quite different. Warmer, more prone to laughter. I keep hoping that version of him is still in there somewhere, buried under all the ice." She looked at Maggie with sudden intensity. "Perhaps that is why he has taken an interest in you. Perhaps he senses that you might be capable of reaching him. Lady Caroline." "Caroline." "Caroline, then. You are reading far too much into a very brief acquaintance. Your brother spoke to me at a ball because I happened to be standing on the same terrace as him. He invited me here today for reasons I do not understand. That is the entirety of our relationship." "Is it?" Caroline's smile returned, knowing and amused. "Then why did he just spend 5 minutes telling Lady Whitmore that anyone who insults you will never receive another invitation to any event he attends for the rest of their natural life? And why is he looking at you right now as though he cannot quite believe you exist?" Maggie's gaze snapped to the tent entrance. The Duke was indeed looking at her, not with the cold assessment she had seen at the Pemberton ball, but with something warmer, something that made her stomach flutter in a way she did not trust. He crossed toward them, his stride unhurried but purposeful. "Caroline, I see you have already attached yourself to Miss Shaw. Someone had to keep her company while you were busy terrorizing our hostess." Caroline rose from the bench, brushing strawberry juice from her gloved fingers. "I like her, Alexander." "Try not to frighten her away with your general air of doom and disapproval." "I do not have an air of doom. You absolutely do. It follows you like a particularly gloomy cloud." She pressed a kiss to his cheek, an affectionate gesture that seemed to startle him, and turned to Maggie. "Come to tea on Tuesday. Ashworth House, 3 o'clock. We shall compare notes on how impossible my brother is, and become the best of friends." Before Maggie could respond, Caroline had swept away in a flurry of blue muslin, leaving her alone with the Duke. "I apologize for my sister," he said after a moment. "She has never learned the art of subtlety." "I found her refreshing." Maggie set down her plate. Her appetite vanished. "Your Grace, what you did out there speaking for me to Lady Pemberton, I must thank you, but I must also ask why. You hardly know me." "Why would you risk your reputation defending a merchant's daughter? Is that what you think I did? Risked my reputation? Society will certainly see it that way. Society sees many things that are not true, and misses many things that are." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive, sandalwood perhaps, underlaid with something she could not name. "I did not defend you to impress society, Miss Shaw. I defended you because Lady Pemberton was being unconscionably rude, and I do not tolerate rudeness directed at my guests. But why am I your guest at all?" The question burst out of her, frustration and confusion tangling together. "I am no one to you. Less than no one, I am the merchant's daughter, the woman society barely tolerates, the perpetual outsider who cannot even secure a proper dance partner at a ball. There is nothing I can offer you, no social advantage to be gained from my acquaintance. So why?" Silence stretched between them. When the Duke finally spoke, his voice was low, almost hesitant, entirely unlike the commanding tone he had used with Lady Pemberton. "On the terrace at the Pemberton ball, you told me that people should be more honest with me. Do you remember?" "I remember being impertinent." "You were honest. There is a difference." He turned to face her, and Maggie was struck again by the intensity of his grey eyes, by the way they seemed to see through all her carefully constructed defences. "I have spent 3 years surrounded by people who tell me what they think I want to hear, who perform for me, as I said that night, who look at my title and my fortune and see only what those things can do for them. And then I walked onto Lady Pemberton's terrace and found you, showing genuine kindness to a crying servant girl, and when you realized I was watching, you did not simper or grovel or try to impress me. You spoke to me as though I were an actual person. You are an actual person. Not to most of society. To most of society, I am a resource to be cultivated, or an obstacle to be feared." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You told me I could set the ballroom on fire and people would thank me for the warmth. Do you know, no one has ever said anything so honest to me in my entire adult life." Maggie did not know what to say. She had spent 4 seasons being dismissed and diminished by people who saw only her father's trade, only her unsuitable bloodline, only the 1,000 ways she failed to meet their impossible standards. The idea that her very unsuitability might be what drew this man's attention. It was too strange, too unexpected, too dangerously close to hope. "I still do not understand," she said finally. "Even if you appreciate my honesty, that does not explain why you would publicly champion me against one of the most powerful hostesses in London. Lady Pemberton will never forgive this slight. She will work against you. Lady Pemberton may do as she likes. Her husband's canal scheme is failing regardless of my involvement, and her social influence depends entirely on her ability to deliver wealthy guests to her events. She will not risk alienating me permanently." He paused. "But you are right that I have made things more difficult for both of us. I should have found a subtler way to include you in society. I did not think through the consequences clearly." "Why not?" The question hung in the air between them. The Duke's expression flickered something vulnerable beneath the ice, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "I am not certain," he said. "I only know that when I learned you had not been invited to this party, I felt—" He stopped, as if the words had run out. "I felt compelled to rectify the situation. It did not seem right that you should be excluded." Before Maggie could respond, a commotion near the garden's entrance drew their attention. A group of young ladies had clustered around Lady Pemberton, who was speaking in furious undertones while shooting poisonous glances toward the refreshment tent. Lady Whitmore hovered nearby, wringing her hands, clearly trying to smooth ruffled feathers without success. "We should circulate," the Duke said, his tone shifting back to formality. "If you remain hiding in this tent, Lady Pemberton will claim victory. Better to walk through the party as though nothing has happened." "Easy for you to say. They are not whispering about you. They are absolutely whispering about me. They simply lack the courage to let me hear it." He offered his arm. "Shall we give them something new to whisper about?" It was reckless. It was foolish. It was exactly the sort of behavior that would cement Maggie's reputation as a social climber who had somehow bewitched a duke. She took his arm anyway. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Maggie had ever experienced. The Duke of Thornfield began appearing in her life with a regularity that defied explanation. He called at her father's house twice in the first week after the garden party brief, formal visits during which they discussed literature, architecture, and the relative merits of various London parks. He invited her and her father to the opera, securing a box close to his own, and spending more time watching her reactions to the music than watching the performance itself. He somehow arranged for her to be included in a private tour of the British Museum, led by one of its curators, and when she expressed fascination with the Elgin marbles, he spent an hour discussing Greek history with an enthusiasm that transformed his usually severe face into something almost animated. Society, predictably, was scandalized. The gossip sheets speculated wildly about the Duke's intentions. Some suggested he had lost his mind with grief and was acting out in increasingly bizarre ways. Others proposed that Maggie had somehow trapped him, though the mechanics of how a merchant's daughter with no connections could trap a duke remained frustratingly vague. A few, more romantically inclined, whispered that perhaps the Ice Duke had finally found someone capable of melting his frozen heart. Lady Pemberton's set mounted a campaign of quiet ostracism. Doors that might have opened to Maggie now closed firmly. Invitations that might have been extended never materialized. The few connections she had cultivated over 4 seasons grew distant, unwilling to risk their own standing by association. But other doors opened. Caroline Ashworth became a fixture in Maggie's life, arriving for tea on Tuesday as promised, and returning again on Thursday and Saturday and the following Tuesday. She was everything her brother was not: warm, effusive, utterly lacking in reserve, and she made Maggie laugh in ways she had almost forgotten how to. "He talks about you, you know," Caroline said one afternoon, curled up on the settee in Maggie's modest parlour with a cup of chocolate and a plate of biscuits. "Not obviously, of course. Alexander would never be so gauche as to actually express an emotion, but he mentions you constantly. Miss Shaw has interesting views on Palladian architecture." Miss Shaw made a rather astute observation about the political situation. Miss Shaw does not giggle, which is refreshing. That last one is hardly a compliment. From my brother, it is the highest praise imaginable. He loathes giggling, says it sounds like birds being strangled. Caroline bit into a biscuit. You are good for him, Maggie. I have not seen him this engaged with anything since Eleanor died. You should not say such things. Maggie set down her teacup, her hands suddenly unsteady. Whatever is happening between your brother and me, it cannot lead anywhere. He is a duke. I am a merchant's daughter. Yes, I know. You mention it constantly. Caroline's dark eyes sparkled with something that might have been mischief or might have been determination. Did you know that our grandmother was a baronet's daughter who ran off with a second son and caused a scandal that took 2 generations to recover from? Or that Alexander's godfather was the illegitimate son of an earl who made his fortune in shipping? The aristocracy likes to pretend its blood is pure, but scratch the surface and you will find all sorts of irregularities. That is not the same. Why not? Because your father made his money in textiles rather than inheriting it from some ancestor who stole it during the Wars of the Roses. Caroline shook her head. You underestimate yourself, Maggie. More importantly, you underestimate my brother. He does not give his attention lightly. If he has chosen to spend time with you, it is because he sees something in you worth seeing. Trust that, even if you cannot trust yourself. Maggie wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons this could only end in heartbreak, her heartbreak, inevitably, since she was the one with everything to lose. But Caroline's words lodged in her chest like a splinter, too small to remove, too sharp to ignore. He sees something in you worth seeing. Did he? Or was he simply lonely, seeking any human connection that did not require the exhausting performance of his public role? Would any honest woman have served his purposes, or was there something specific about her that had captured his attention? She did not know, and the not knowing was the most terrifying part. The house party invitation arrived 3 weeks into their strange courtship, if it could be called that. Maggie was not certain what to call it. They had never spoken of intentions or expectations. He had never said anything that could be construed as romantic. And yet the invitations kept coming, the visits kept happening, and the intensity of his grey-eyed gaze never seemed to diminish. "A week at Thornfield Manor," Caroline announced, waving the invitation like a flag of victory. "My brother's country estate in Derbyshire. He is hosting a small gathering, very select, very intimate, and you are invited. I cannot possibly attend a house party at his estate." "Why not? You have attended everything else." "Everything else was in London, where propriety could be maintained. A week in the countryside, in his home, staying under his roof." Maggie shook her head. "It would be tantamount to announcing an engagement that does not exist." "Then perhaps it should exist." Caroline's voice gentled. "Maggie, I am not blind. I see the way you look at him, the way he looks at you. Something is happening between you, whether you are willing to name it or not. This house party is his way of moving things forward, of giving you both a chance to see what might be possible. And if nothing is possible? If we spend a week together and realize that we are not suited? Then you return to London with the answer to a question you have been too afraid to ask." Caroline took her hands. "Is that not better than spending the rest of your life wondering?" Maggie thought of all the balls she had attended alone, all the dances she had not been asked for, all the years of smiling through rejection, pretending she did not want what she could not have. She had built her armor so thick, so impenetrable, that she could no longer remember what it felt like to be vulnerable. Perhaps that was exactly why she needed to go. "I will need a new wardrobe," she said finally, and Caroline's shriek of delight echoed through the parlour. Thornfield Manor was not what Maggie had expected. She had imagined something cold, all marble and symmetry, designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Instead, the house that emerged from the Derbyshire hills was warm and rambling, built of honey-coloured stone that glowed in the afternoon light. Gardens surrounded it in carefully controlled wildness, and beyond them, rolling parkland stretched toward distant woods. "It was my mother's favorite place," Caroline said as their carriage approached the entrance. "She redesigned the gardens when she first arrived as a bride. Alexander has kept them exactly as she left them." Maggie stored this information away, another piece of the puzzle that was Alexander Ashworth. A man who maintained his mother's gardens, a man who could not bear to change the things that mattered. The other guests had already arrived, a small gathering, as promised, of perhaps a dozen people. Maggie recognized Lord Marcus Fairfax, whom Caroline had mentioned as Alexander's closest friend, and Lady Whitmore, who seemed to have recovered from the drama of her garden party and now regarded Maggie with something approaching curiosity rather than hostility. There were several other couples, minor aristocrats and their wives, who treated Maggie with cautious politeness that she suspected had been mandated by their host. And then there was Mrs. Helena Crawford. She was beautiful in the way of cut glass, sharp, glittering, and cold. A widow in her late 20s, she was some distant cousin of Alexander's late wife, and she had been installed at Thornfield as a sort of unofficial hostess ever since Eleanor's death. Caroline had mentioned her once in passing, with a tone of distaste that suggested a complicated history. "Miss Shaw." Mrs. Crawford's smile did not reach her eyes as she greeted Maggie in the drawing-room before dinner. "How unexpected to see you here. I was not aware that Alexander, His Grace, I mean, had extended his charitable works to include house parties." The insult was elegant, almost subtle enough to be mistaken for small talk. Maggie felt it land like a blow beneath her ribs. "Mrs. Crawford." She kept her voice pleasant through sheer force of will. "How kind of you to welcome me. I understand you have been serving as hostess here for some time." "Indeed. Since dear Eleanor's passing, someone had to ensure the household ran smoothly. Alexander has been so consumed with grief, poor man. He barely knows what day it is, let alone how to plan a dinner menu." Mrs. Crawford's eyes swept over Maggie's gown, new, expensive, and still somehow inadequate in this setting. "Though I suppose he has found other distractions lately." Before Maggie could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "Helena, I was not aware you had arrived." Alexander stood in the doorway, and his expression as he looked at Mrs. Crawford was colder than Maggie had ever seen it. Gone was the almost warmth she had grown accustomed to, the ghost of humanity that emerged when they were alone together. This was the Ice Duke in full, and even Maggie felt a chill run down her spine. "Alexander, darling." Mrs. Crawford crossed to him, reaching up to adjust his cravat in a gesture of casual intimacy. "I came early to ensure everything was in order. You know how lost you are without someone to manage these details." He stepped back, putting distance between them. "Miss Shaw, I trust your journey was comfortable?" "Very comfortable, thank you." Maggie felt suddenly awkward, out of place, uncertain of the dynamics she had stumbled into. "The countryside is beautiful." "I am glad you think so. I hope you will allow me to show you the grounds tomorrow, if the weather holds." His gaze lingered on her face, something unspoken passing between them. "Caroline tells me you have an interest in landscape design." "I have an interest in many things, Your Grace. It is one of the few advantages of an unconventional education." "Indeed." The ghost of a smile crossed his face there and gone, as always, but enough to warm Maggie's chest. "I look forward to hearing your thoughts on my mother's gardens." Mrs. Crawford's expression flickered something sharp and calculating behind her beautiful eyes. "I am sure Miss Shaw will find the gardens quite provincial compared to the public parks in London. We cannot all appreciate the subtle beauties of country living." "On the contrary," Maggie said, her chin lifting despite herself. "I find that public parks are designed to impress. Private gardens are designed to be loved. There is rather a significant difference." Alexander's smile deepened, just barely. "Well said, Miss Shaw." Now, shall we go in to dinner? I believe Cook has prepared something rather special." He offered his arm to Maggie, not to Mrs. Crawford, and led her toward the dining room. Behind them, Maggie could feel the widow's gaze like ice against her back. The days at Thornfield blurred together in a haze of unexpected happiness. Maggie had braced herself for awkwardness, for the constant awareness of her own unsuitability, for the subtle slights that attended her everywhere in society. Instead, she found something she had not known she was looking for: belonging. The other guests, whatever their private opinions, treated her with courtesy that seemed increasingly genuine as the days passed. Lord Marcus, in particular, went out of his way to include her in conversations, and she began to understand why Caroline called him Alexander's closest friend. He was warm where Alexander was cold, laughing where Alexander was silent. Yet beneath the levity there was a sharpness that missed nothing. "He has been different since he met you," Marcus said on the third evening, when they found themselves alone together in the library after dinner. "I have known Alexander since we were boys at Eton. I have never seen him like this." "Like what?" "Present, engaged, interested in something beyond duty and grief." Marcus swirled the brandy in his glass, considering his words. After Eleanor died, he simply stopped. He went through the motions of his life, managed his estates, appeared in society when required, but there was no one home behind his eyes. It was as though he had decided that feeling anything was too dangerous, so he would simply stop feeling altogether. That sounds lonely. It was, for him and for everyone who loved him. Marcus looked at her directly. "You have changed that, Miss Shaw. I do not know how, and I am not certain Alexander knows either, but something in you has reached him, has reminded him that he is still alive." Maggie thought of her own walls, her own armor, the years she had spent convincing herself she did not need what she could not have. "Perhaps we recognize something in each other." "Perhaps," Marcus smiled. "Just be careful with him. He is more fragile than he appears, and if you hurt him, Caroline will almost certainly have you murdered. She is very protective of her brother." "I have no intention of hurting him." "No, I don't suppose you do, but intentions and outcomes are not always the same thing." He finished his brandy and stood. "I should find my wife before she convinces Mrs. Crawford to donate to another one of her charitable schemes. Do enjoy the library, Miss Shaw. It is Alexander's favorite room in the house." After he left, Maggie wandered the shelves, trailing her fingers over leather spines and gilt lettering. It was a beautiful room, floor-to-ceiling books, comfortable chairs arranged before a massive fireplace, windows that overlooked the gardens she had come to love over the past days. She could imagine Alexander here, surrounded by books and silence, retreating from a world that demanded too much of him. "You found my sanctuary." She turned. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the lamplight from the hall, and her heart did something complicated in her chest. "Lord Marcus said it was your favorite room." "Did he?" Alexander entered, closing the door behind him. "Marcus talks too much. It is one of his many failings as a friend. He also said I have changed you." The words came out before she could stop them. "That I have reminded you that you are still alive." Silence. The fire crackled in its grate. Somewhere in the house she could hear faint laughter from the drawing-room, where the other guests had gathered. "Marcus should learn to mind his own affairs," Alexander said finally, "though he is not wrong." Maggie's breath caught. "Your Grace." "Alexander." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the firelight reflected in his grey eyes. "We have been dancing around formality for weeks now, Miss Shaw. I think we can dispense with it when we are alone." "Alexander, then." The name felt strange on her tongue, intimate and fragile. "And you should call me Maggie." "Maggie." He spoke it softly, as though testing how it felt. It suits you. Strong and unconventional. Unconventional is a polite way of saying unsuitable. No, it is my way of saying that I am tired of suitable. He was very close now, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell that subtle sandalwood cologne that she had come to associate with him. I spent my whole life doing what was suitable. I married a suitable woman, a woman I loved, yes, but who was chosen partly because she met every requirement society placed on a future duchess. I performed my suitable duties, attended my suitable events, said my suitable words. And then Eleanor died, and none of it mattered. Suitability could not save her, could not save our child, could not fill the hollow space they left behind. Maggie's throat tightened. I am sorry. About Eleanor. About your child. I know you are. That is why I can speak of it to you. His hand rose, almost touched her cheek, then dropped back to his side. You do not offer platitudes. You do not tell me that time heals all wounds or that she is in a better place. You simply see. You see grief for what it is, and you do not try to fix it or minimize it. I cannot fix something I do not understand, and I would not presume to minimize someone else's pain. No, you would not. He studied her face, and Maggie felt suddenly transparent, as though all her walls had crumbled without her noticing. Do you know why I invited you here? I have wondered. I told myself it was because I wanted to give you a chance to experience society at its best, to show you that not everyone would treat you as Lady Pemberton did. He paused. But that was a lie, or at least not the whole truth. What is the whole truth? I invited you here because I could not bear the thought of going a whole week without seeing you. The words came out rough, almost unwilling. Because somewhere in the past weeks you have become necessary, essential. I do not know when it happened or how, but I find that I cannot stop seeking you out, cannot stop thinking about you when you are not there, cannot stop wanting. He stopped, jaw tight, as though he had already said too much. Maggie's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. What do you want? I do not know. He laughed, a strange, broken sound. That is the terrifying part. I have spent 3 years knowing exactly what I wanted, which was nothing. No one. Complete emotional isolation. It was safer that way. Caring for people only leads to losing them. You have not lost me. I have not had you yet. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Maggie felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, the world rearranging itself into something new and frightening and wonderful. Alexander, you should go. He stepped back, putting distance between them. This is not... I should not have, please, Maggie. Go back to the others. We can speak tomorrow, when I have had time to think clearly. She wanted to argue, wanted to close the distance he had created, to tell him that she did not need him to think clearly, that she wanted him confused and uncertain and vulnerable, because that was how she felt too. But there was genuine distress in his eyes, genuine fear. Whatever was building between them, he was not ready to face it. Not yet. Tomorrow then, she said. Good night, Alexander. She left him standing alone in his sanctuary, surrounded by books and firelight, and the ghosts of everyone he had ever lost. The next morning dawned grey and drizzly, confining the guests indoors. Maggie spent the hours before luncheon in the drawing-room with Caroline, pretending to read while her mind raced through the events of the previous evening. I cannot stop seeking you out, cannot stop thinking about you. Had he meant it? Could he possibly have meant it? The Duke of Thornfield, admitting to feelings for a merchant's daughter, it was the stuff of fairy tales, and Maggie had long ago stopped believing in fairy tales. And yet there was something in his eyes when he looked at her, something that made her believe, despite all her careful cynicism, that perhaps this time things might be different. "You are not reading that book," Caroline observed. "You have been staring at the same page for 20 minutes. I am thinking. About my brother, presumably." Caroline set down her embroidery. "He was in a very strange mood at breakfast, would not meet anyone's eyes, spilled coffee on his waistcoat, which I have never seen him do in his entire life. Something happened last night." "Nothing happened." "Maggie." Caroline's tone brooked no argument. "I have known Alexander for 23 years. I can read him like a book, admittedly a book written in a very small font, with frequent margin notes in Greek. Something happened between you two. You may as well tell me, because I will find out eventually." Maggie hesitated. The conversation in the library felt too raw, too private to share. But Caroline was watching her with those sharp, dark eyes, and Maggie found she needed to talk to someone. "He said he could not stop thinking about me," she admitted, "that I had become necessary, essential." Caroline's eyes went wide. "He said that? Those exact words?" "Those exact words. And then he told me to leave because he needed time to think clearly. That absolute fool." Caroline stood up so abruptly that her embroidery tumbled to the floor. "He has been alone with his grief for so long that he has forgotten how to feel anything else. And now that he finally feels something, he is trying to think his way out of it, as if love were a mathematical equation to be solved." "Love?" The word caught in Maggie's throat. "We have not spoken of love. You do not have to speak of it for it to be happening." Caroline began pacing, her skirts swishing against the carpet. "I have watched the two of you for weeks now. The way he softens when you enter a room. The way you smile when you think no one is watching. This is not a casual flirtation, Maggie. This is something real, something worth fighting for." "Fighting for what? Your brother is a duke. I am a— If you say merchant's daughter one more time, I shall scream." Caroline stopped pacing and gripped Maggie's shoulders. "You are Maggie Shaw. You are intelligent, kind, witty, and brave enough to speak honestly to a man who intimidates everyone else he meets. Those are the things my brother sees when he looks at you. Not your bloodline or your fortune or your father's profession. Just you." Tears pricked at Maggie's eyes, sudden and unwelcome. "What if that is not enough?" "It is enough for Alexander. The only question is whether it is enough for you." Caroline's grip gentled. "Can you love him, Maggie? Not his title or his wealth or even his attention him. The grieving, closed-off, emotionally stunted man who has no idea how to be vulnerable with another human being. Can you love that man enough to wait while he figures out how to love you back?" It was not a simple question. Maggie thought of the walls she had built around her own heart, the years of rejection that had taught her not to hope. She thought of Alexander's grey eyes, flickering with warmth he could not quite express. She thought of the way he had stood between her and Lady Pemberton's cruelty, a shield she had not asked for but desperately needed. "Yes," she said finally, "I think I can." Caroline's face broke into a brilliant smile. "Then we have work to do." But the work was interrupted by Mrs. Helena Crawford. Maggie did not know how she ended up alone in the gallery that afternoon. The rain had stopped, and the other guests had dispersed to various amusements, Caroline to the music room, Lord Marcus and his wife to the billiard room, Alexander to his study for some business matter that could not wait. Maggie had wandered into the long gallery that ran along the house's east wing, drawn by the portraits that lined the walls. The Ashworth ancestors gazed down at her from gilded frames, stern patriarchs and elegant matriarchs, children in formal poses, hunting scenes and pastoral landscapes. Near the end of the gallery, she found what she had unconsciously been seeking, a portrait of a young woman in a white gown, her dark hair arranged in perfect ringlets, her smile serene and confident. Eleanor. It had to be Eleanor. She was beautiful, was she not? Maggie turned to find Mrs. Crawford standing a few feet away, her expression unreadable. "I was merely admiring the portrait," Maggie said carefully. "The artist was very skilled. Lawrence. He was all the rage that season." Mrs. Crawford moved closer, her eyes on the painted face of Alexander's dead wife. "Eleanor and I were cousins, you know. We grew up together. I was there when she met Alexander for the first time, at a ball not unlike the one where you met him." "I did not realize you were so close." "Oh, yes. We told each other everything." Mrs. Crawford's voice was honey-sweet, with something sharp beneath. "She wrote to me constantly after she married, told me how happy she was, how much she loved him. And then she died, and I came here to help him grieve, and I have been here ever since." Maggie said nothing. She could feel the trap being laid, but she could not yet see its shape. "It has been 3 years now," Mrs. Crawford continued. 3 years of watching him suffer, 3 years of hoping he might eventually move on, might find happiness again with someone suitable. She turned her gaze to Maggie, and the sweetness vanished. "And then you appeared. A merchant's daughter with no connections, no breeding, nothing to recommend her except a sharp tongue and a certain desperate boldness. And suddenly Alexander cannot see anyone else. Mrs. Crawford, do you think he loves you?" The words cut like a blade. "Do you think this infatuation will last? He loved Eleanor, Miss Shaw. He loved her with every fibre of his being, and her death nearly destroyed him. Whatever he feels for you, it is a pale shadow of what they had, a distraction from his grief. And when the novelty wears off, when he remembers who you are and what you are, he will discard you like every other unsuitable woman who has tried to catch his attention." The words landed like blows, each one striking at the fragile hope Maggie had been nurturing. She wanted to argue, wanted to defend herself, but Mrs. Crawford's certainty was devastating. "I see I have upset you." The widow's smile returned, sharp as glass. "I apologize. I only wanted to save you from future heartbreak. It would be cruel to let you believe that someone like you could ever be Duchess of Thornfield." She swept out of the gallery, leaving Maggie alone with Eleanor's portrait and the wreckage of her own heart. The conversation in the library happened that same evening. Maggie had spent the afternoon in a daze, Mrs. Crawford's words echoing through her mind. A pale shadow, a distraction from his grief. Someone like you. She knew she should dismiss them as jealousy, as manipulation, as the desperate tactics of a woman who had hoped to secure Alexander for herself. But the words had found their target, had struck at every fear she had ever harbored about her own worthiness. She had avoided Alexander at dinner, keeping her eyes on her plate, responding to his concerned glances with forced smiles. She had pleaded a headache when the guests gathered in the drawing-room afterward, retreating to her bedchamber with a book she could not read. And then, just as she was preparing for bed, a knock came at her door. "Maggie?" Alexander's voice, low and urgent. "I need to speak with you." She should not open the door. It was late. She was in her dressing gown, and being discovered alone with him would destroy what remained of her reputation. But his voice held something that made her reach for the handle anyway. He stood in the hallway, still dressed for dinner, but dishevelled in a way she had never seen him, cravat loosened, hair slightly disordered, a wild look in his grey eyes. "Alexander? What is wrong? I saw you at dinner. Something has happened. Something has changed." He pushed past her into the room, then seemed to realize where he was and stopped short. "Forgive me. I should not have. I was not thinking. You are here now." She closed the door behind him, past caring about propriety. "Tell me what is wrong." "You tell me first." He turned to face her, and she saw it then, the fear beneath the ice, the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. "You would not look at me at dinner, would not speak to me. What did I do? What happened in the library last night, I know I spoke too freely, revealed too much if I have frightened you away." "You did not frighten me." The words came out rough. "Someone else did." She told him about Mrs. Crawford, about the gallery, the portrait, the carefully aimed cruelties. She watched his face shift from confusion to understanding to something that looked like rage. That manipulative... He cut himself off, jaw tight. Helena has always been, she hoped, after Eleanor died. She made it clear that she was available, should I wish to remarry. I did not. I had no interest in marriage, no interest in anyone. But she has remained here, and I allowed it because she was Eleanor's cousin, and it seemed harmless. She loves you. She loves the idea of being a duchess. His voice was harsh. What she feels for me is not love. It is ambition dressed in sympathy. He crossed to her, stopping just short of touching her. She was wrong, Maggie. Everything she said to you, it was wrong. Was it? The question came out smaller than she intended. You loved Eleanor. You loved her completely. How can I ever compare to that? You cannot compare to Eleanor because you are not Eleanor. You are Maggie Shaw, stubborn, honest, impossibly brave, and what I feel for you is not a pale shadow of anything. It is new, terrifying, different than anything I have felt before. His hands rose, finally touching her face, cradling her cheeks as though she were something precious. I loved my wife. I will not deny that. But she is gone, and I am still here. And somewhere in the past weeks, I have discovered that being alive means more than just surviving. It means feeling, wanting, hoping for something beyond grief. Tears spilled down Maggie's cheeks. Alexander, I am not good at this. His voice cracked. I have spent 3 years building walls around my heart, and you have somehow walked through them as though they were not there. I do not know how to love you properly. I do not know if I can give you what you deserve. But I know that when I am with you, I feel more alive than I have since Eleanor died. And I know that the thought of losing you, of watching you walk away, because Helena Crawford made you believe you were not enough, that thought is unbearable. I am not walking away. She placed her hands over his, pressing them more firmly against her face. I am here. I am staying. He kissed her. It was not gentle, there was too much desperation in both of them for gentleness. His mouth claimed hers with 3 years of suppressed longing, and she answered with 4 seasons of loneliness, and somewhere in the middle they found each other. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "Marry me," he said. The words hit her like a wave. "What?" "Marry me. Be my wife. Be the Duchess of Thornfield." His eyes searched hers. "I know it is too fast. I know society will say I have lost my mind. But I cannot. I do not want to spend another day pretending that you are not the only thing I want." Maggie's heart was racing. This was everything she had told herself not to hope for, everything she had spent 4 seasons learning to stop wanting. And now it was being offered to her in a moonlit bedroom by a man whose hands were trembling against her face. "You are proposing to me in my dressing gown," she said, because she could not think of anything else to say. "I am proposing to you because I cannot imagine my life without you." His thumbs brushed away her tears. "Say yes, Maggie, please." And then the door flew open. Mrs. Crawford stood in the hallway, her face a mask of triumph, and behind her half the house party, staring at the scene with expressions ranging from shock to scandalized delight. "Well," Mrs. Crawford said, her voice carrying down the corridor, "I thought I heard something suspicious. It seems the merchant's daughter has finally shown her true colors." Maggie felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She was ruined. Discovered alone with a man at night, in her dressing gown, with evidence of tears and intimacy plain on her face. No explanation would be sufficient. No defense would matter. Alexander stepped in front of her, shielding her from the staring eyes. "Miss Shaw and I are engaged," he said, his voice cutting through the whispers. "We were discussing arrangements for the announcement. Any questions?" Silence fell over the corridor. Mrs. Crawford's triumphant expression flickered, then hardened. "Engaged," she repeated. "How convenient." "It is not convenience. It is the truth." Alexander's tone brooked no argument. "Maggie has agreed to be my wife. The banns will be read beginning Sunday, and anyone who has anything unpleasant to say about my future Duchess may say it to me directly, now." No one spoke. Even Mrs. Crawford seemed to have run out of words. "Excellent." Alexander turned back to Maggie, and his expression softened. "I apologize for the circumstances. This is not how I wish to announce our engagement." Maggie looked at him, at this man who had just publicly declared his intentions before half the aristocracy, who had placed his reputation on the line to protect hers, who was looking at her with something that might have been love. And she saw in his eyes not duty, not obligation, not a man doing what society required to save a woman's honor. She saw fear, fear that she might say no, that she might refuse him, that he might have misread everything between them. It should have reassured her. Instead, it broke something inside her chest. "You proposed because they saw us," she said quietly. "Because you had to." "No." His brow furrowed. "I proposed because I love you. The timing was because Mrs. Crawford opened that door." Maggie stepped back, creating distance between them. "You proposed to protect me, to save my reputation, to do the honorable thing." "Maggie, I have spent my entire life being an obligation, a burden, a problem to be managed." The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere wounded. I will not be your duty, Alexander. I cannot marry you knowing that you proposed because you had to, not because you wanted to. I wanted to before they arrived. You heard me. I heard you say words in a moment of passion, and then I watched you say them again, publicly, because you had no other choice. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold together pieces that were flying apart. I need to think. I need time. Please. His face had gone pale, grey eyes shocked. You are refusing me? I am. She could not breathe. I am going home, to London. In the morning. And you are going to let me go, because if this is real, if any of it is real, then it will still be real in a week, when I have had time to think clearly. She crossed to the door, still standing open, and addressed the crowd that had not yet dispersed. The engagement is not yet official, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Please refrain from spreading premature gossip. Now, if you will excuse me, I am retiring for the evening. She walked past them, past Mrs. Crawford's smirk, past Lady Whitmore's confusion, past Caroline's anguished face, and did not look back. Behind her, she heard Alexander say her name once more, broken and pleading. She kept walking. The carriage wheels rattled over the rutted country road, carrying Maggie away from Thornfield Manor and everything she had almost allowed herself to want. Dawn had barely broken when she had slipped from the house, her hastily packed trunk following behind her in the servant's hands. She had left a note for Caroline, brief, apologetic, inadequate, and another for Alexander that had taken her 3 attempts to write. I cannot marry a man who proposed from obligation. I release you from any responsibility toward me. Please do not follow. I need time to understand what is real and what was merely circumstance. M. The words had felt hollow even as she wrote them, but she had sealed the letter before she could change her mind. Now, watching the Derbyshire hills give way to flatter farmland, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake, or prevented one. She could not be certain which, and that uncertainty was precisely the problem. "I love you," he had said, but he had said it while compromised, while caught, while facing the ruin of her reputation if he did not act. How could she trust words spoken under duress? How could she know if his proposal came from genuine feeling or from the rigid honor that governed every other aspect of his life? The Duke of Thornfield would never allow a woman to be ruined because of him. It would violate everything he believed about duty and responsibility and the proper behavior of gentlemen. He would propose to a scullery maid if circumstances demanded it, would marry anyone at all rather than leave her reputation in tatters. That was not love. That was obligation wearing love's clothing. But he proposed before they arrived, a small voice whispered. He was already saying the words when the door opened. She pushed the voice aside. She could not trust it, could not trust herself, or her desperate desire to believe that someone, anyone, might genuinely want her for herself, rather than her fortune, or her usefulness, or the circumstances that demanded it. Better to retreat, better to shore up her walls and return to the safe, lonely existence she had known before Alexander Ashworth had walked onto Lady Pemberton's terrace and changed everything. Better to survive alone than to build her happiness on a foundation of duty. London in late spring should have been lovely. The parks were green, the weather mild, the social season in full swing, with an endless parade of balls and garden parties and evening entertainments. But Maggie saw none of it. She had retreated to her father's townhouse like a wounded animal seeking its den, and there she remained, refusing visitors, ignoring invitations, and telling herself that this hollow ache in her chest would eventually fade. "You cannot hide forever, Maggie mine." Her father stood in the doorway of the morning room, watching her with concerned blue eyes. A week had passed since her return from Derbyshire, and she had barely left the house. Whatever happened at that house party, whatever sent you running home in the middle of the night, you must face it eventually. I am not hiding. I am simply choosing not to participate in society at present. She kept her eyes on the book in her lap, though she had read the same paragraph 6 times without comprehending a word. There is a difference. Is there? He crossed to sit beside her, his bulk settling into the delicate chair with comfortable disregard for its groaning protests. Lady Caroline has called 3 times. You have refused to see her each time. That does not seem like choice. That seems like fear. Father, I did not build a fortune by avoiding difficult situations, and I did not raise a daughter to hide from her problems. His voice was gentle despite the firmness of his words. Tell me what happened. Perhaps I can help. Maggie set down her book. She had not told him the full story, had given only the barest outline of a misunderstanding, a hasty departure, a need for time to think. But her father had not survived 3 decades in business by being unobservant, and she could see that her half-truths had not satisfied him. The Duke of Thornfield proposed to me, she said. Her father's eyebrows rose. And this is a problem because he proposed after we were discovered alone together. After half the house party had already seen us in a compromising situation. The words came out rough. He proposed because he had to, father, because his honor demanded it, and I cannot marry a man who is only with me from obligation. Her father was quiet for a long moment, his calloused fingers drumming against his knee. "Tell me about this compromising situation. How did it come about?" "Mrs. Crawford, a cousin of his late wife, she said things to me. Cruel things, designed to make me doubt his feelings. And I believed them, or I let them wound me. And when Alexander came to my room that night—" "He came to your room? In the middle of the night?" "To talk. Only to talk." Maggie felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He wanted to know why I had been distant at dinner. And when I told him what Mrs. Crawford had said, he told me she was wrong, that what he felt for me was real, that he wanted to marry me. So he proposed before anyone discovered you together." "Yes, but—" "And then the door opened and people saw you, and he repeated his proposal publicly to protect your reputation." "Yes, but that is precisely the problem." Maggie stood, pacing to the window, staring out at the street without seeing it. "How do I know which proposal was real? The private one, spoken in passion? Or the public one, spoken from duty? How do I trust that he truly wants me, when the circumstances gave him no choice but to act as though he did?" Her father was quiet for so long that she turned to look at him. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something between sadness and understanding. "When I asked your mother to marry me," he said finally, "I was 22 years old and had nothing but the clothes on my back and a half share in a failing textile mill. Her father had already chosen someone else for her, a prosperous merchant with good connections, a man who could provide the security I could not offer. But she refused him, refused everyone her father put forward, and kept refusing until the old man finally gave in and let her marry me." Maggie knew this story. She had heard it 100 times, in 100 variations. But something in her father's voice tonight made it sound new. "I asked her once, years later, why she had taken such a risk on me," he continued. "Why she had defied her father, thrown away the comfortable future she could have had, all for a man with nothing to recommend him but determination and love. Do you know what she said?" Maggie shook her head. "She said, because when you looked at me, you saw me. Not my father's money, or my family's connections, or what I could do for you. Just me. She said she would rather have struggled in poverty with a man who truly saw her than lived in comfort with one who only saw her usefulness." Her father's eyes glistened. "You are so like her, Maggie. So afraid of being wanted for the wrong reasons that you cannot recognize when someone wants you for the right ones. It is not the same. The Duke is a man who has spent 3 years building walls around his heart, and you somehow walked through them." Her father rose, crossing to stand beside her at the window. "That is what Lady Caroline said when she called. She said her brother has not been the same since you left, that he returned to London the same day you did, and has been haunting his townhouse like a ghost, refusing to see anyone, sending letter after letter that you return unopened." Maggie's heart clenched. She had received the letters, had held each one in her trembling hands before setting it aside with the seal unbroken. She had told herself it was self-protection, that reading his words would only weaken her resolve. Now she wondered if it was simply cowardice. "He proposed before the door opened," her father said gently. "He spoke of marriage before anyone forced his hand. Whatever came after the public declaration, the protection of your reputation, those were consequences, not causes. The cause was a man who loves you, trying to tell you so before he lost his chance." "But how can I know that? How can I be certain?" "You cannot." Her father took her hands in his rough, work-worn ones. "Love is not certainty, Maggie mine. It is faith. Faith that the person who says they love you means it. Faith that they will still mean it tomorrow and next year, and when you are old and grey, and neither of you can remember what you were so afraid of." He squeezed her fingers. You cannot know for certain. You can only choose whether to believe. Tears spilled down Maggie's cheeks, the first she had allowed herself since fleeing Thornfield. What if I choose wrong? What if I believe him, and he breaks my heart? Then your heart will mend, as hearts do, and you will go on living. Her father's voice was soft. But what if you choose not to believe him? What if you push him away because you are afraid, and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been? That seems a far worse fate than a broken heart. Maggie thought of the letters piled on her dressing table, thought of Caroline calling again and again, refused each time, thought of Alexander, alone in his townhouse, sending words she would not read. "I have been a coward," she whispered. "You have been wounded, which is rather different." Her father pulled her into an embrace, and for a moment she was a child again, safe in her father's arms, before the world had taught her to expect rejection. But wounds heal, Maggie. They heal faster when we let someone help. She clung to him, crying in earnest, now crying for the mother she barely remembered, for the lonely seasons she had endured, for the walls she had built so high that she had nearly locked out the one person who might have been worth letting in. When the tears finally subsided, she pulled back and met her father's eyes. "I need to read those letters." "Yes." He smiled, the same smile her mother had fallen in love with all those years ago. "I believe you do." There were 7 letters in all, each more desperate than the last. "Maggie," the first one began, "please do not return this unopened like the one before. I need you to understand. I need you to hear what I should have said better that night." She read them in order, watching his careful composure crumble with each passing day. He wrote of the proposal, both proposals, the private and the public, and swore on everything he held sacred that the first had been pure intention, untainted by circumstance. He wrote of Mrs. Crawford, whom he had dismissed from Thornfield the morning after Maggie left, sending her away with enough money to establish herself elsewhere, and enough clarity about her unwelcome status that she would not dare return. He wrote of his grief for Eleanor, and how he had believed for 3 years that loving again would be a betrayal, until Maggie had shown him that the heart could expand rather than replace, that caring for someone new did not diminish what he had felt before. "I do not know if you will ever read these words," the final letter said. "I do not know if anything I say can undo the damage of that night, the timing that made my proposal seem like duty rather than desire. But I need you to know, even if you never respond, even if I never see you again, I love you. I love your stubbornness and your honesty and the way you speak to servants and dukes with the same forthright kindness. I love that you wear your freckles like armor and your pride like a shield. I love the woman you are and the woman you are becoming, and I will love you until my last breath, whether you choose to believe me or not. But I hope you believe me. I hope you give me the chance to spend the rest of my life proving that I mean every word. Yours, in whatever way you will allow. Alexander. Maggie sat on her bed, the letters scattered around her, and wept. She wept for the time she had wasted, for the doubt she had allowed to poison what might have been, for the walls she had built so carefully, stone by stone, over 4 seasons of rejection and disappointment, walls that had protected her from pain but also imprisoned her in loneliness. She wept for the girl she had been, arriving at the Pemberton ball in her green silk gown, counting chandeliers to avoid counting cruelties. And she wept for the woman she was becoming, who had somehow attracted the attention of a man who saw through her armor to the tender heart beneath. When the tears finally stopped, she rose from the bed and crossed to her writing desk. There was a letter to write, but no, that was not right. Letters were for distance, for careful words and measured thoughts. What she needed to say required presence. What she needed to say required courage. She rang for her maid. She had a duke to find. Ashworth House loomed large in the fading afternoon light, an imposing Georgian townhouse on one of Mayfair's most prestigious streets. Maggie had never approached it before, had always been collected by carriage for her outings with Caroline, and standing before its massive front door now, she felt the full weight of what she was about to do. A merchant's daughter, calling uninvited on a duke. It was precisely the sort of presumption society would condemn, the sort of desperate gesture that had defined every fortune hunter who had ever set her sights above her station. But Maggie was not here to catch a duke. She was here to apologize to a man she loved. The butler who answered her knock was the picture of impassive dignity, his expression revealing nothing when she gave her name. "I shall inquire whether His Grace is receiving visitors," he said, in a tone that suggested His Grace had not been receiving visitors of any variety. "Please tell him it is urgent." Maggie's voice was steady, though her heart pounded. "Tell him I have read his letters." Something flickered in the butler's eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or hope, before he retreated into the house, leaving her standing in the entrance hall. The minutes stretched out, each one an eternity, and Maggie had nearly convinced herself that Alexander had refused to see her when footsteps sounded on the stairs. Not the butler. Something faster, less measured. Alexander appeared on the landing, and the sight of him stole her breath. He looked terrible. There was no other word for it. His usually immaculate appearance had given way to dishevelment, his cravat askew, his hair disordered, dark circles beneath his grey eyes. He looked like a man who had not slept in days, who had forgotten to eat, who had been hollowed out by uncertainty. He looked the way she felt. Maggie. Her name was a ragged whisper as he descended the stairs. "You came. I read your letters." She stood her ground as he approached, resisting the urge to close the distance between them. She needed to say this properly, needed him to hear every word. "I should have read them sooner. I should have trusted you when you told me the truth at Thornfield. I was afraid, and I let that fear convince me that you could not possibly mean what you said. I meant every word." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the tremor in his hands. "I still mean them." "I know." She drew a breath, steadying herself. "I have spent my whole life being unwanted, Alexander. Not by my father, he has always loved me, but by everyone else. Society has made it very clear that I do not belong, that no amount of money or determination can make me acceptable, that I am tolerated rather than welcomed wherever I go. And I learned to protect myself from that rejection by pushing people away first, by convincing myself that I did not want what I could not have." His jaw tightened. "Maggie, let me finish, please." She raised a hand, and he fell silent. "When you proposed the first time, before the door opened, I wanted so desperately to believe you. But wanting made me vulnerable, and vulnerability terrified me. So when Mrs. Crawford gave me reasons to doubt, I seized on them. I told myself that you were only acting from duty, from honor, from the rigid code that governs your life. Because if I believed that, then your proposal did not mean anything, and I did not have to be afraid of losing something precious. And now," his voice was barely audible, "what do you believe now?" "I believe that I have been a fool." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I believe that I let fear rob me of something that might have been wonderful. I believe that when you said you loved me, you meant it, and I threw that love back in your face because I was too afraid to accept it. Maggie, I am not finished." She stepped closer, close enough to see the rapid pulse at his throat. "I believe that you are infuriating and cold and impossibly stubborn, and that underneath all of that ice there is a man who has been hurt so badly that he forgot how to feel. I believe that we are alike in that way, two wounded people who built walls around our hearts and convinced ourselves we were safer alone." She reached up, her fingers trembling as they touched his face. "And I believe that I love you, Alexander. I love you, and I am sorry. And if you can find it in your heart to forgive me for running away." He kissed her. It was different from their first kiss, gentler, more careful, as though she were something precious that might break. His hands came up to cradle her face, and she felt the fine tremor in his fingers, the desperation beneath his restraint. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. "There is nothing to forgive," he said. "You were afraid. I understand fear." "I should have trusted you." "You are trusting me now." His thumbs brushed away the tears that had spilled despite her efforts. "That is what matters." She laughed, a watery sound somewhere between joy and relief. "So what happens now?" "Now I propose to you again." He pulled back just far enough to meet her eyes. Properly this time, without interruptions or witnesses or any question of obligation. He took her hands in his. "Maggie Shaw, I love you. I love your stubbornness and your honesty and your freckles and your complete inability to pretend to be anything other than exactly who you are. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, not because duty demands it, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me?" She wanted to say yes immediately. Wanted to throw herself into his arms and never let go. But something in her needed to ask one more question, one final test of the faith her father had spoken of. What about society? What about the scandal of a duke marrying a merchant's daughter? What about it? His voice was firm. "Society can hang for all I care. I have spent my entire life doing what society expected of me, and all it brought me was isolation and grief. If society cannot accept the woman I love, then society can enjoy my absence." His grip on her hands tightened. "I choose you, Maggie. Over propriety, over expectations, over every rule I was taught to follow. I choose you, if you will have me." This time, she did not hesitate. "Yes." The word had barely left her lips before he kissed her again, longer, deeper, with all the pent-up longing of the weeks they had spent apart. When they finally separated, both breathless, Maggie became aware of applause echoing from somewhere above them. She looked up to find Caroline standing on the landing, beaming, with Lord Marcus and his wife beside her. "Finally," Caroline declared. "I was beginning to think I would have to lock you both in a closet until you sorted yourselves out." "Caroline," Alexander's voice held a warning, but he was smiling, actually smiling, the expression transforming his face into something almost boyish. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough to hear the proposal, which was quite romantic, I must say. Much better than the first attempt." "There is nothing wrong with the first attempt. You proposed in her dressing gown, Alexander. The scandal sheets would have had a field day." Caroline descended the stairs, pulling Maggie into an embrace the moment she reached the entrance hall. "Welcome to the family, sister. I am so glad you came to your senses." "So am I." Maggie returned the embrace, feeling something loosen in her chest, some final knot of tension, some last remnant of the walls she had built. "So am I." The wedding took place 3 weeks later, in the small chapel at Thornfield Manor. It was not the grand society event that London had anticipated indeed. The Tun had barely recovered from the shock of the engagement announcement before the couple had retreated to Derbyshire to exchange their vows in private. But Maggie had never wanted a grand society event, and Alexander had spent enough of his life performing for audiences. They wanted something genuine, something that was truly theirs. The chapel was ancient, its stone walls softened by centuries of prayer and weathered by Derbyshire winds. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting coloured shadows across the worn pews where their small gathering of guests sat waiting. Caroline served as bridesmaid, resplendent in pale pink silk, while Lord Marcus stood beside Alexander as his witness. Maggie's father occupied the front row, his eyes already glistening before the ceremony began. And there were other faces, too, not the aristocrats who had snubbed her for 4 seasons, but the people who had treated her with genuine kindness. Mrs. Amelia Blackwood, who had befriended her at that long-ago musicale. Lady Whitmore, who had sent a warmly apologetic letter and a beautiful wedding gift. Even Bessie Collins, the maid from the Pemberton ball, who had been quietly hired into the Thornfield household and now sat at the back of the chapel with the other servants, crying happy tears into a handkerchief. Maggie walked down the aisle on her father's arm, wearing a gown of ivory silk that caught the coloured light and scattered it like jewels. She had chosen not to wear a veil she wanted to see clearly, wanted to meet Alexander's eyes the moment she entered the chapel and hold his gaze all the way to the altar. What she saw in those grey eyes made her breath catch. He was looking at her the way her father had described her mother looking at him all those years ago, as though he saw her. Not her father's money, or her unsuitable bloodline, or the scandal that had brought them together. Just her. Just Maggie. The vicar's words washed over her in a blur, ancient phrases, sacred promises, the weight of vows that had bound couples together for centuries. She spoke her responses clearly, her voice steady, and watched Alexander do the same. And when the moment came to exchange rings, simple gold bands, without pretension, she felt the last of her walls crumble into dust. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the vicar said. "You may kiss the bride." Alexander gathered her into his arms with the same careful intensity he had shown that night in her dressing gown when everything had seemed so fragile and impossible. But now there was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation, only joy, clear and bright and unguarded. "My wife," he murmured against her lips. "My Maggie." She kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into the gesture, all the loneliness of her past, all the hope of her future, all the love she had spent so many years afraid to offer. The small congregation applauded, Caroline cheered, and somewhere in the back of the chapel, Bessie Collins sobbed loudly enough to echo off the ancient stones. They were married. Against all odds, against all expectations, against everything society had taught her to believe about her own worth. They were married, and she was home. The early years of their marriage were not always easy, but they were always worthwhile. Alexander learned to speak his feelings rather than burying them beneath ice and duty, though the learning came slowly and with occasional setbacks. Maggie learned to accept love without waiting for it to be withdrawn, though some days the old fears rose up and had to be gently talked back into submission. They fought sometimes, both of them too stubborn to give ground easily, but they also made up, and the making up taught them things about themselves and each other that smoother sailing never could have. Their first child arrived a year after the wedding, a daughter with her mother's red hair and her father's grey eyes, whom they named Eleanor Margaret, after 2 women they had loved and lost. Maggie had worried about the name, had wondered if it would cause Alexander pain, but he had been the one to suggest it. "She is gone," he said, his hand resting on Maggie's rounded belly, "but she was part of my life, and I do not want to pretend otherwise. This child will know about her namesake. She will know that I loved before, and that loving again did not diminish that love." 2 more children followed, a boy named Reginald after Maggie's father, and another girl named Caroline after the sister who had championed their match from the beginning. Thornfield Manor, which had been so quiet and sad when Maggie first arrived, became a place of noise and chaos and boundless joy. Society adapted, as society always does. The scandal of a duke marrying a merchant's daughter faded into a romantic story, retold at dinner parties by people who claimed to have supported the match all along. Lady Pemberton continued to snub them. Some grudges are eternal, but her influence had waned, and her cuts were more amusing than painful. Mrs. Helena Crawford had remarried within a year to a viscount who seemed entirely untroubled by her history, and Maggie found that she could not hold on to her resentment. Everyone deserved a chance at happiness, even those who had tried to prevent hers. Maggie's father became a fixture at Thornfield, spending summers in Derbyshire with his grandchildren, teaching them about the textile mills that had built their fortune and the hard work that had made their comfortable lives possible. He died peacefully in his sleep when young Ellie was 7, surrounded by family, and Maggie grieved him with the full depth of her heart, but she grieved knowing that he had seen her happy, had met his grandchildren, had witnessed the life she had built. It was more than many received. Caroline married Lord Marcus Fairfax, to absolutely no one's surprise, and their house became a second home for the Thornfield children. The two families spent holidays together, Christmases full of noise and presents, and the particular chaos that comes from too many children in too small a space. Alexander, who had once been called the Ice Duke, was often found on the floor building block towers for toddlers, or reading stories in exaggerated voices to delighted audiences of small people. "You have changed," Marcus observed one evening, watching his friend attempt to arbitrate a dispute between Ellie and young Caroline over the rightful ownership of a particular hair ribbon. "I have thawed," Alexander corrected. "There is a difference." "Is there?" Alexander looked across the room to where Maggie sat with Marcus's wife, both women laughing over some private joke. As if sensing his gaze, Maggie looked up and met his eyes, her smile softening into something private, something just for him. "Yes," he said. "There is." 8 years after their wedding, Maggie stood in the garden at Thornfield Manor and watched her children play. It was high summer, the gardens her mother-in-law had designed in full and glorious bloom. Ellie was teaching young Reggie some complicated game involving hoops and sticks that seemed to have no rules. Baby Caroline, not such a baby anymore, at 3 years old was collecting flowers with the grim determination of a general marshalling troops. Alexander had been called away to deal with some estate matter, but Maggie could see him through the study window, his dark head bent over papers, occasionally glancing up to watch his family through the glass. She thought of the woman she had been 8 years ago, the woman who had arrived at Lady Pemberton's ball in her green silk gown, counting chandeliers to avoid counting cruelties, the woman who had built walls so high that she could no longer remember what sunlight felt like. That woman would not have believed this life was possible, would not have believed that a duke would see her for who she truly was, would love her stubborn honesty and her freckles and her merchant blood, would not have believed that she could be a duchess, a mother, a wife, not despite who she was, but because of it. "Mamma!" Ellie came running across the lawn, hair flying wild behind her. "Mamma, there is a carriage coming. Is it Aunt Caroline?" "I expect so, darling." Maggie smoothed her daughter's hair back from her flushed face. "She and Uncle Marcus are bringing the cousins for the summer. Remember? Will Cousin Frederick let me ride his pony this time? You shall have to ask him nicely. I always ask nicely." Ellie's expression suggested that her definition of nicely and Maggie's were not entirely aligned. "Mamma, will there be a party tonight, with dancing?" "A small one, yes, for the grown-ups." "I want to come. I am almost 8. That is very nearly grown." Maggie laughed and kissed her daughter's forehead. "Ask your father. Perhaps he will let you watch from the landing." Ellie shrieked with delight and raced toward the house, presumably to begin her campaign immediately. Maggie watched her go, heart full to bursting with a love she had once believed herself incapable of feeling. A hand slipped into hers. She turned to find Alexander beside her, his estate business apparently concluded. "A party tonight, I hear," he said. With dancing. A small one. I hope you do not mind. I never mind anything you plan. He pulled her close, wrapping an arm around her waist. Though I reserve the right to hide in the library if Lord Pemberton begins talking about his canal scheme again. The canal scheme failed years ago. And yet he persists in discussing it. The man has a gift for boring conversation. Maggie laughed, leaning into his warmth. You are terrible. I am honest. You, of all people, should appreciate that. She looked up at him, at the face that had once seemed carved from ice, now softened by years of love and laughter. At the grey eyes that had frightened half of London, now warm when they rested on her. At the man who had stood in Lady Whitmore's garden and declared her his guest, who had proposed to her in a midnight bedroom, who had waited for her when she ran away. I do appreciate it, she said. I appreciate everything about you, even the parts that are infuriating. Especially those parts, I should think. They keep you on your toes. As if I needed help with that. She rose on those very toes to press a kiss to his jaw. I love you, Alexander. And I love you. His arm tightened around her. I loved you when you were a stranger on a terrace, being kind to a crying servant. I loved you when you told me I could set a ballroom on fire. I loved you when you ran away from me, and when you came back, and every moment in between. You were not certain you loved me when I was a stranger on a terrace. I was certain of something. Love seemed as good a word for it as any. He kissed her forehead. You changed everything, Maggie. You walked through my walls like they were not even there, and I have been grateful every day since. Even the difficult days? Especially the difficult days. Those are the ones that teach us what we are made of. She thought of all the difficult days they had weathered, the disagreements, the moments of doubt, the times when old fears had risen up to cast shadows over their happiness. And she thought of how they had weathered them together, refusing to let go of each other even when the holding on was hard. That was love, she had learned. Not the absence of difficulty, but the commitment to face it together. The carriage is here, she said, spotting the vehicle coming up the long drive. We should go greet our guests. In a moment. Alexander turned her to face him fully. I want to remember this. First. Remember what? This exact moment. Standing in my mother's garden, watching our children play, with the woman I love in my arms. His voice was soft. There was a time when I believed I would never feel anything but grief again. You proved me wrong. We proved each other wrong. Maggie reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that had deepened over the years, the silver that had spread further through his dark hair. I believed I would never belong anywhere. You gave me a home. You gave yourself a home. I merely provided the house. She laughed, rising to kiss him properly. You are impossible. Impossibly yours. The carriage had stopped before the house, and Caroline was already emerging in a flurry of travelling clothes and excited exclamations. Children poured out after her, her three and Maggie's three converging in a chaos of greetings and questions and demands to see the new puppies in the stable. Maggie and Alexander watched from the garden, hands still intertwined, as their families merged into one noisy, joyful mass. We should go help, Maggie said. We should. But neither of them moved. The summer sun was warm on their faces. The garden hummed with bees and birdsong. Somewhere in the house, a child shrieked with laughter, and Caroline's voice rose in mock exasperation. It was ordinary. It was everything. I am glad you let me in, Maggie said softly. That day at the garden party, when Lady Pemberton asked who had allowed me entry, I am glad you stood up. So am I. Alexander's arm tightened around her, though I prefer to think of it as standing beside you rather than standing up for you. You never needed defending. You only needed someone to recognize that you belonged. And you recognized it. I recognized you. He kissed her temple. My Maggie, my wife, my home. She leaned into him, watching their life unfold before them, the children and the family, and the years still to come. "Let us go greet our guests," she said, "before Caroline comes looking for us and accuses us of hiding." "We are not hiding. We are savoring." "She will not appreciate the distinction." "No," Alexander agreed, smiling. "She never does." They walked toward the house together, toward the noise and the chaos and the love that had grown from such unlikely beginnings. Behind them, the garden bloomed in the summer light, beautiful and wild, and exactly as it was meant to be, just like the life they had built, just like the love that had made it possible, just like them.